listeners, and welcome to a Greek Geek.
A Greek geek?
Screwed it from the outside.
I did. I do like doing that. A Geek Tragedy. Well, you know, it's an exciting part of my life. We should move on. I'm Stephen, known online as Plague Man for various reasons. I am your host. I would like to welcome to the pod the most erudite human and my best friend, Holly, properly, but she's peeing her pants at the moment after our exciting intro. Holly, how are you?
I'm good. I'm peeing myself after that exciting intro.
And of course, our very own Savage Man and Craft par excellence.
Hola.
How you doing? You always say hola when I say your name. Every time.
Hola.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So that we can't hear your names. No one knows who you are. They think you're called Hola. At least that's what I think. How you doing?
I'm doing all right, thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a good week. I have done stuff. I did my first sculpt for probably about 2-3 years.
Nice. It was
it felt quite
cool
good.
bit, wasn't it?
It was a sort of beaked bird-like, skull-like thing. And I even got through the plaster mold making section, which I always hate, because you fuck that up and then you're back to square one. But I didn't fuck it up.
Look good though. What's it for?
It's for a commission for an American Ren Fair costume.
Nice.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to go to a Ren fair.
Yeah, me too.
There you go. And hidden behind the scenes is our producer and long-suffering Kit, who shall be named Kit.
Hi,
probably
Kit.
For themselves, they're wasting the hour that I allocated to them no more than 2 minutes ago. With
Right.
fuck-ups at the start and general nonsense. But there we are. That's just how it is. For your benefit, guys, I'm all right, because I know you're not going to ask.
I was about to, actually.
How are you, Stephen?
I'm all right. I've had a bad day, but I'm here now with you lovely people, so it's all going to be good. And I finally managed to install my laptop, which was like...
Oh, thank God for that.
And they faffed around for hours, but I've done it now. It's all good. And Holly's insured to drive my car.
I am. That's not worrying at all in the slightest for anybody.
This is episode 3 of our exciting podcast, which is called various things depending on how I speak, which we're calling Conversations of Cthulhu today. Last week, we started talking about the concepts of how books and films and radio plays and the like skip between various forms of media, change, shape, inspire, and keep alive tales and stories that might otherwise have been lost to time. It turns out we barely managed to squeeze the enough time in to talk about our chosen favourites into our 1 hour pod. And we want to keep talking. You know, we talked after the pod, we want to talk more about this stuff. And it's our pod, so we can, and we're going to. And we're aware that, like, in the chosen subject we want to talk about today, we may blather on slightly longer than we would like to, and it might tip over into another pod. But again, it's our pod, so we might do that. It's hard to say at the moment. But we wanted to go with something like a genre rather than a specific title. And after a short chat, we kind of decided we want to do some, maybe like something horror-y, like and we went for something a bit that's horror. It looks like it's not horror,
But I'm not sure that horror-y is a word.
Well, okay, it's a tautology of the word horror and the word "e," which is a
That's
terrifying sound that people make. What?
That's not what tautology means.
You're right, it's not, is it?
You mean portmanteau.
I mean portmanteau. I've had a very long day. Should we talk about my day instead? I clearly won't do that.
No.
I'm sure our audience would be hanging on the edge of their seats.
So I got up this morning.
I've already heard this once.
Anyway, HP Lovecraft. That was where we were going with this kind of thing, which you probably guessed because I said the thing was called Conversations
with Cthulhu.
Yeah, so let's jump straight in. So let's talk first of all about his original stories. So, he started writing back in 1970, a long time ago in a Lovecraftian country far, far away. A young man called HP Lovecraft, who turned out to be quite a bit of a terrible human being in some regards, but we'll touch on that later on. Started writing his sort of cosmicism-inspired, what ended up being called Lovecraftian horror. I mean, like, his father was institutionalized, so, you get quite a lot of that kind of theme for a lot of his books. Well, he's obviously inspired by... Anyway, you get the idea of where I'm going with this. And before the pod, we were talking about, who had read the books, and everyone's like, we've all read the books, and we talked about how it was a little bit difficult to actually kind of read them en masse, didn't we?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, just even to use an example, it took our friend Trues around 3 years to read the complete works of HP Lovecraft. And that was reading it at every given opportunity out of one book that was literally sort of the thickness of something very thick. My ability to do similes and metaphors has disappeared, apparently. Thank you. Just like HP Lovecraft did.
As thick as my ability to do an intro to a pod.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, they are really difficult to read. He is verbose is a word for it. He is he's difficult to follow on occasion. So yeah, there's quite a lot in there that I find difficult.
Yeah,
but some of the visuals are fantastic. Like, you have to have I feel like you have to have a really good visual imagination to read Lovecraft and to enjoy it.
I would say that, like, he was unknown during his time, right? He worked with Weird Strange Tales, was it? I can't remember what it was now. Weird Tales.
Weird Tales, I think.
The guys that started publishing him and like working with him. And his first printing of oh Christ, I'm really testing the ability that I have not to have done any research and just trying to rely on my memory. What? It's as it is. I like you guys have done loads. But yeah, like, he produced 400. I remember that he produced 400 issues of one of his books, and that he only managed. He was really unhappy with it. It might have been it was Innsmouth. It was Shadows over Innsmouth, and he did like 400 copies. And he was really unhappy with the fact that it was just full of errors and shit, and he didn't like it. And it only sold 200. And it was badly bound. And then the printer went out of business, and they burnt the rest of his books. And that was probably his biggest literary claim to fame of his time. And it wasn't until like the 70s that his work was reviewed, and we get, like, a lot of Call of Cthulhu, the same as a role-playing game, which we're going to discuss in a bit. Did you raise your hand there, Beans? It looked like you were.
I did because
Beans,
I
by the way,
thought
Holly, if you're new to this.
Oh yeah, hi. That's me. H.P. Lovecraft's first published book was The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. It was published after the author's death, first in a serialized form in the magazine Weird Tales in 1941, and then as a standalone novel in 1943. Lovecraft initially wrote the story in 1927.
There you go. Look at that.
Curiously enough, it was also the first adaptation of his story into a film. Although the film was titled The Haunted Palace, after an Edgar Allan Poe short story or poem, but it was basically the story of Charles Dexter Ward and starred Vincent Price and Lon Chaney Jr.
Classics.
Was that intentional? The fact that it was designed to be an adaptation of the Charles Dexter Ward story, and it just happened to be named after a much more famous person.
Exactly that.
To get the views in.
Yeah, I think they just named it after an Edgar Allan Poe story because everybody knew who Edgar Allan Poe was, and not many people knew who H.P. Lovecraft was.
Do you think that was one of the first cases of clickbait?
Maybe. Catfishing.
Anywho,
I was going to leave you guys to it. But yeah, I mean, like, I found that when I was younger, I absorbed a lot of my Cthulhu via osmosis. I read a lot of the books on the bus on the way to school, but once we started doing like the tabletop role playing game, I just absorbed a lot of the knowledge, kind of. And of course, like when I was younger, I didn't realize that other people had written a load of stuff in his mythos, because. He still wasn't that well known, even though we're doing Call of Cthulhu, just assumed that he wrote everything. He didn't realize that loads of other people were inspired by his work. Yeah.
I still don't think he is very well known. Like, I have conversations with people, and I think my expectation, because, I spend so much time with you and with Mark and talking to our kind of friends and our community who are all very kind of
geeky,
like very geeky and have all sort of made their love of Cthulhu and that mythos kind of really well known, and we do the role playing games and everything. I have conversations then with my friends who aren't in that sphere, and they have no idea what Cthulhu is. They have no idea who HP Lovecraft is. And for me, it feels like in that part, like it feels like it should be one of those universal things, like everybody knows what Cthulhu is. In my head, it's universal, but it really isn't. I still don't think he's particularly well known.
I think he's much more well known than that. I mean, like we talk about radio stuff, and he's been on loads of BBC bits and pieces, his work and whatever. We're going to talk about plushies in a while, and they're everywhere. The image of Cthulhu, that face, is quite famous, and yes, I mean, we can all get plushies out. Mine's up there.
I don't know where mine is.
But the point is that, like, he's the concept of films like Cloverfield and stuff, and these colossal monsters come out. It's all there. It's like it's everywhere. Perhaps we might not know who Lovecraft is, but I think a lot of people know what Cthulhu is.
I think a lot of people would know what Cthulhu is if they could see Cthulhu, if the cue was visual rather than verbal.
But, okay, we were talking about like his visual stories, right? So
sorry,
we get into the end. It's not your fault. We all were doing it. I think it's a ticking off for all of us, especially you, Mark. You were the one with the plushie.
No, he's just keeping my lap warm.
That's quite
obviously,
disturbing.
one of the things that's obviously overlooked, and we got to admit, I wanted to mention this reasonably early on, is that he was obviously a colossal racist, and problematic to read for anyone really, if you're reading the original works where he hasn't been edited down into the various views that he had on anyone that was not white Anglo-Saxon kind of person. And later on in his life, even if you were white Anglo-Saxon but had talked to people that weren't, and it's nice that he's dead in that regard, and that he's not making any money now out of the stuff.
Plushies.
Yeah, because I doubt he wanted to be selling plushies of Cthulhu. That wasn't probably his life dream. I'm going to write these amazingly good books about cosmic horror, and people want to buy a soft plushie of my Cthulhu. That's not really where we want to go with that.
And make it cute.
But
make Cthulhu cute.
Good. I'm glad that's not where it's gone in many ways. Ha ha ha. If you had to pick a favourite from the classic stuff, what would it be? What would be your? And if you want to say things like all of the Dream cycle, I'll be okay with that. So if you want to go like the Doom That Came to Sarnath, the Cats of Ulthar, and all that into one big bit, you can, or you want to go like down a different road.
Holly, you going first?
Mark, no, you have to go first. I have to think about it. I have to think hard.
Well, I think it's a toss-up between two stories for me. Shadow over Innsmouth is obviously a classic. And I think At the Mountains of Madness as well. Those would be my two favourite Lovecraftian stories, I think.
Yep. So Shadows would be Shadows is just brilliant, right? Excellent bit of work. But if we step away from Shadows, I would go with the one that actually did used to terrify me when I was younger, was the Rats in the Walls. I used to be absolutely terrified of the Rats in the Walls for whatever reason. It was a very well put down bit of text, and I could feel them in the walls, and they scared me. And then everyone getting I know this is like 100 years old, but spoilers nonetheless. And then going down to those cellars and knowing that everything was dead and eaten, and Roman times, terrifying stuff. I was down there dancing the Sali dance.
It's the Rats in the Walls always really used to remind me, and I would have loved to have done like a proper study of it at one point, but the Rats in the Walls always reminded me quite a lot of like the main themes in that, very, very similar to the main themes in Kafka's Metamorphosis, and that kind of, like, having read them both, that always really struck me. But that's a completely just a random point. For me, it's probably either the Cats of Ulthar, because it's got cats in,
and the cats they eat people, so it's good.
and the cats are great. Or I loved the Rats in the Walls when I read it. It was I think it was one of the first in the sort of little omnibus I had of Cthulhu stories, or the actual Call of Cthulhu.
Okay. And like so. For me, the stories like Shadows, particularly Shadows, had a really big influence on the way that I wrote, and ran games, and then sort of like moved on with my affection of that kind of unknown horror and things that seem normal, masking, horror underneath that beautiful kind of style that he writes in. And you can see that this is something that you guys really were keen to talk about in a minute when we talk about like kind of the influence that he had on the work of others that you can see throughout. Ever since people started reading him again, probably, I guess. Lovecraft's work was not well received when he was, alive, but he managed to keep going nonetheless. His stories carried on. I mean, obviously there were a lot of reviews of his work later on in the 70s, like I said, a lot of it was picked up again, but there were authors that picked up the torch. Like I went to mention Brian Lumley and Robert Howard's and his references to in all the Elder Gods in Conan and stuff. But I know you guys were keen to talk about that bloke I've not heard of.
Stephen King, who you have heard of, but you just don't like the way he writes. And if you don't like the way that somebody writes, then you refuse to talk about them or even acknowledge their existence.
Who's that?
Stephen King, who is one of the absolute masters of characterization in horror settings.
I mean, it's pretty
absolute
good.
Master.
I think he's got a track record.
I will die on the Stephen King hill. I love Stephen King.
I haven't read Stephen King for years, but I did enjoy him.
Well, I just I feel for me, if you can see a Lovecraftian influence in a lot of the things that Stephen King writes, even so far as what Stephen was saying about you've got sort of something that on the outside appears to be very normal and very sane and very sort of beautiful, and then that's not what's going on at all, and there's a level of kind of that masking and that mystery. But at the same time, for me, they're absolute polar opposites, because Stephen King is very easy to read. Like, Stephen King writes really well for people to read him, and Lovecraft wrote very, very wordily, and he takes a lot more brain.
Yeah, Cyclopean manner.
Yeah, everything's eldritch as well. Like, everything is eldritch.
True.
And indescribable as well, which he then goes on to describe in quite good detail.
Yeah, just like that. Yeah.
Okay, so the two, Stephen King and his most obvious Lovecraftian stories, I would say there were two which spring to mind. One is The Mist, which was turned into a very good film with an utter gut punch of an ending, which wasn't actually in the book.
That made me so sad.
Yeah, and the short story Crouch End, which is total Lovecraftian. And those are the two that spring to mind. But I think the general theme of otherworldly horror. I mean, it is pretty much a Lovecraftian story.
For definite, but just with a lot more cocaine. You can see, and it's another one of the reasons why I love reading Stephen King so much, is that you can read it and it's like storytelling, cocaine binge, storytelling. Like, you can see where the kind of the craziness sort of comes from.
We all do lines down here.
But for me, I think it's in works like Doomakey, and he's done a lot of work with. I can't help myself but feel like anything that is horror related and related to the sea is just intrinsically Chthonian. There's a lot of, and anything to do with water that is scary is Lovecraft in my brain. That's a connection that I can't unforge. And there's a lot of Lagoon. Yeah, absolutely.
Deep
like
one.
Yeah, I can't get away from that in my brain. So I think that
my son hears this podcast and then begins to describe having a bath as Lovecraftian as an excuse not to have one in the evening.
You're welcome, Bill. But yeah, no, it's just
for me. It's going to be Mike Mignola and Hellboy. I think we mentioned beforehand, but I ever since I started reading Hellboy and the BPRD, I was very much drawn into it. I mean, even the artwork, is very. In my head, that's when I'm reading a Lovecraftian book now. That's how everything looks.
It's total Lovecraftian. And in the film adaptation, the second film that they did, with the Ron Perlman one, they even had an elder thing make a little guest appearance in the background, which I thought was great.
Well, the elder gods make a lot of appearances throughout so many different works. They are popular boys, the elder gods and girls. They make their way into various different canons, which is interesting because again that's locking H.P. Lovecraft's writing into other people's worlds and going like, yeah, in our world H.P. Lovecraft stuff exists, and we're going to acknowledge that, especially when they make it Cthulhu. That's always good. Like in I think I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but I'll go here and say like shows like Supernatural and stuff that reference sort of Chthonian bits and pieces. It's cool. I like it. It's the way it creeps into other fandoms is very excellent. And it's not him. It's not Lovecraft. It's the expansion that has been made of, particularly for the role playing game, which again we'll discuss later, of the Elder Gods, which is fantastic.
I mean, I agree with you, and I like things sort of. There is a list. There is an actual Wikipedia page which I have just found called "List of Works Influenced by the Cthulhu Mythos," and it is long.
Yes, I have the same page open here.
Oh, right. See, look at us go researching on the fly.
It makes me happy that last week I talked about the Shadow, and I mentioned that Darkwing Duck was picked out from the Shadow, and he's on the list. A story arc of the comic book series involves the criminal organization Fowl unleashing Duck Cthulhu, an obvious parody of Cthulhu, and just above that is Crouch End. There you go.
Yep.
And Discworld is just below that.
Yeah, Discworld, yeah.
Necro-nomi-nomi-con.
Necro-nomi-nomi-con.
Yeah, we can't stop saying it. That's one of my favourite cookbooks, isn't it? The Necro-nomi-con-nom-nom-nom-nom-nom.
The Necro-nom-nom-nom, yeah.
Yeah, made me happy.
It's got some really good but also quite terrifying cocktails.
Yeah, so you're quite right. The list of stuff is huge. I mean, the Necronomicon itself, which we haven't even mentioned yet, and it's just there. I mean, just look at the Ash and Evil Dead stuff.
Yeah, Evil Dead. I was going to mention that.
Cladu, Faradu, and so forth. It just goes on, and like I say, it exists in all the fandoms. And I have this great feeling that when it's probably more like me and Mark than Holly because it involves the 80s, which is like 30 years before you were born.
10 years before
when we were younger people, and this sort of stuff wasn't as mainstream. Yeah, you'd hear the words Cthulhu or Necronomicon, and you'd get all excited because you knew what it was, and other people would be like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And you'd be like, "Yes, I am a pure geek. I have knowledge of this. I have esoteric knowledge of the words you're using television program." And other people were like, "What is this Necronomicon?" And you'd be like, "Yes, I know. It's from Cthulhu." Ha ha ha.
As a little point, H.R. Giger's big format art book was called the Necronomicon.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah. So I was one of the things I was also going to mention was A Study in Emerald, which is a really good Neil Gaiman story, which is kind of like he's got Sherlock Holmes and he's just boosted him through Riley. And he's kind of the other side, and that's kind of the crossover that's going on there, which I really, really quite enjoyed as a graphic novel and a board game, in fact. Go on.
I kind of want to ask you very quickly because I know that both of you have very strong Doctor Who opinions.
Who?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And there's a thing here about the snowmen and an evil being known as the Great Intelligence, which is supposed to be...
He's from the Yeti stories of
Yog-Sothoth.
Troughton's era.
Spoilers, they were robots.
Yeah.
Because according to this list, that's pretty Chthonian.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with that?
Well, the Great Intelligence.
Sea Devils.
Sea Devils, good. But the Great Intelligence specifically...
No, it hadn't really occurred to me. I don't think a lot of the early Doctor Who writers were really kind of going along Lovecraftian vibe. I mean, I've watched a lot of the interviews with these people. They've never gone like kind of, "Oh, we were trying to channel Lovecraft."
I mean,
but the Sea Devils, they really are. There's one there. Look, Mark. Have you ever seen such a thing before?
Good grief, where did you get that from, Stephen?
For everyone that's only listening to the podcast, Stephen pointed at a mask of a sea devil that Mark made.
You made that? Oh, right. That explains why you gave it to me.
Good God. To be honest, I think this list might actually be pushing it because it apparently thinks that there are episodes of Ben 10 that have been inspired by Lovecraft,
Well,
so we can
Darkwing
probably...
Duck, you know.
True.
I mean, SpongeBob SquarePants lives under the ocean. I mean,
You didn't say anything sea-based was Lovecraftian. But...
yeah.
I didn't know, and horror.
Well, SpongeBob pretty
SpongeBob
horror.
SquarePants isn't exactly horror.
It's post-APOC.
It's disturbing, but it's not horror.
Post-APOC. There you go. Anyway, so we kind of like finagled ourselves off there for like a good 10 minutes talking.
I'm so sorry.
No, I think that's okay because we're going to talk about bad films that we've watched next. Because books, I think we've done to death a bit there.
And good films.
Well, I bring the good films as well because obviously there's quite a lot of films that are pretty shonky that have been done because for a long time people were like, you can't make a good Cthulhian film, and then there's Event Horizon, which is getting on a bit now, and it's still fucking terrifying, right? And it's clearly got a lot of I say Chthonian again. We're going to refer back to that kind of cosmicism kind of idea that's going on.
Inspired by,
like the wider mythos, more than
which makes me happy. And I think I've written in my notes here that like my stuff goes from watching Dagon to Event Horizon to Reanimator to Cool Girl of Cthulhu, which when I discovered it existed, I had to watch it because it's really funny. Seriously, it's great. The masks are brilliant. They're not like bought from Poundland or anything.
They very well might be.
Maybe they are, but it's a hilariously good film. It's not. It's awful. But I'll let you, because when we discussed it, you guys had a lot to say about films, so I thought that's my list.
Mine's more just a set piece rather than a discussion.
I'm going to have to live through.
Again, yes, because you didn't live through it the first time. And then, so I'm going to say this, and then you guys could have a really lovely discussion about all of the films that I haven't seen. But there is a film that came out like a few years ago that is incredibly Chthonian. It's The Lighthouse.
Anyway, moving on.
No. And it has Willem Dafoe, and it is Willem Dafoe, isn't it?
Yep.
And Robert Pattinson in it, and it's disturbing and creepy. And Stephen was at my house one day and said, let's watch The Lighthouse, presumably because it's very Chthonian, and that is a thing that A, he's interested in, and B, he was running a Cthulhu game at the time, so it's kind of almost a bit like research. And I said, oh, all right then, if we must. We put the film on, and within 5 minutes, and I'm not kidding, it was literally like 5 minutes, Stephen was asleep and slept through the entire thing.
True. I woke up like not long after the instant you're going to describe.
And then went, what's going on? And I went, this is bloody weird. But the thing, so I had to sit there by myself because I knew full well that if I turned it off or turned the channel over or turned it down, you would have woken up and complained. So I just sort of thought, well, I'll just sit and watch it, see what it's all about. You woke up about 5 minutes after Willem Dafoe kind of jizzed all over Robert Pattinson's face.
Spoilers.
Everybody.
Leave out the bit where I wake up, and then it won't be spoiled.
Yeah. And then Stephen woke up and then fell promptly back asleep again. And it was one of the most bizarre experiences of my life. You can see absolutely the kind of it's the mundane terror.
I remember there being a seagull.
There was this...
I'm going, why is the seagull on screen? What's going on?
Yeah.
What's happening, Jason?
There was a seagull and there was a mermaid at one point. But it's kind of full of that sort of like that really mundane terror, like everything's just really normal, but it's really normal in a completely abnormal way. And because no one's addressing the fact that it's abnormal, that
William
makes it
Dafoe
worse.
to come over Mr. Patterson.
It was
Mark,
very...
What do you want to talk about, Mark?
Anyway, watch the film, it's good, but try and stay awake.
I'll do my best. I don't think I've seen it, or maybe I have. Maybe I just blanked it all out after the jizzing on the face bit.
So you blanked it off.
Mind bleach. Yeah. No, I mean my list of Lovecraftian inspired films is like how long have we got? That there are a lot. Not many of them particularly good adaptations of his actual stories, but some excellent ones which would sit comfortably within his worlds. I think probably, I mean, John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness. That is directly Lovecraftian. It's not. It kind of strays into Stephen King territory, but it is definitely Lovecraftian. As I would say, The Thing, his version of The Thing is as well. That that's an alien horror, nameless, undescribable thing, which wrecks terror in a small community of researchers. What else we got? Obviously, Hellboy we've mentioned, and then you had like the Stuart Gordon things like Reanimator and From Beyond and Dagon, which were all fairly low budget, but at least trying to be vaguely based upon his stories. But then you've got things like, what have we got? Society. That's a weird film. If you've never seen Society, it's an old 1980s film, I think it was, and that's definitely alien horrors, sort of controlling the world. I mean, if we want to talk Lovecraftian, Prometheus, yeah, which I think probably scuppered Del Toro's plan to make At the Mountains of Madness, because a lot of the themes in Prometheus are directly, I think, lifted from In the Mountains of Madness, with alien beings influencing humanity and the development of humanity. And I would also say one of my favourite films, Quatermass in the Pit, written by Nigel Neal. Well, again, that's alien entities directing the course of humanity, and
another film that I recently slept through.
No, you heathen! It's a great film.
Well, I've seen
dated, but still great.
You see, I hadn't seen it before.
Yeah,
it was very good. The half that I saw, though, was very good.
Yeah, you should see the other
very
half.
much enjoy it.
Next time we come down, we'll watch it properly.
Okay.
Was Prometheus the one that was supposed to be like a forerunner to Alien?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I remember not enjoying that very much.
No, high hopes for it, but really, really stupid plot. Just a team of international experts behaving like complete and utter idiots in the face of an alien encounter.
The way that his work has, reached its fingers out into the world and pushed various stories like into the spotlight is very interesting. Because you're not talking about alien films, right? Would you say that the original inspiration for Aliens comes from Lovecraft? Yeah, or just that particular part of the film? Because either way, I like the fact that it pushed out there in the first place. So I only asked this question because I've had other people say it to me, and I've gone maybe, but not only in a way that like kind of that investigatory form of terror can be found in like some of Lovecraft's work, but beyond that, not really. But the fact that his fingers might push their way into like the development of that story later on, that's quite cool. I like that.
I don't think so, and the reason that I don't think so is because it just lacks that, it lacks that mundanity, like it lacks that kind of everyday, like you're going about your day, every day is exactly the same until at some point it's not. I'm
always finding a giant room full of weird space eggs on my daily walks, and I'm always wanting to stick my face in one.
I'll tell you what would have been great if you'd had H.R. Giger designing a proper Lovecraftian film, an adaptation, because he would have.
That would have been really cool.
Yeah, it would.
And I think as well that kind of like that for me personally, and I know that like visualization is a really personal thing. For me, Lovecraft doesn't translate into sci-fi. Like that whole kind of idea of like what I think of as Lovecraftian horror is very on the earth apart from, you know,
It's
like the
dated, right?
gods and stuff. Yeah.
His concept of science fiction is firmly rooted in what he learned in the late 1800s and early 1900s, right? So there's a lot of theory work there, which is some of which is proven out to be quite accurate, but a lot of it is nonsense, right? Because, you know, there's actually not an atmosphere in space, you know, that kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of his stuff turns out to be utter bullshit, but that's not the point. The cosmicology of it is, as we keep going back to, is very much his imagination of like different worlds. There's some great bits in the dream stories where they're like, I'm going to get this slightly wrong, but he's like, and the cats of Alpha found more cats on Saturn because, you know, they're cats, so they would be on Saturn, and, you know, this kind of like concept that different planets meant different things, all that kind of stuff's really translated for his work, but. That's what you're referring to, right? It's science fiction in the 1920s, so that's kind of where it belongs. It doesn't belong in deep space on like the Enterprise, or, you know, in the science fantasy world of Star Wars or whatever. It belongs very, very firmly in that. Oh fuck, we don't have ray guns, or we don't have, you know, mobile phones, or we don't.
I feel like if you put when you put Cthulhu into a setting where everybody has very equal access to information, it becomes. It becomes less.
The level of helplessness that is developed through Lovecraft story is incredible. Like even when there's some great examples of his work where, you know, like I'm going to go off and see my friend Professor George. I'm making these names up. Who lives, and of course, do you know where he lives, gentle reader? He lives in the middle of buttfuck nowhere. But don't worry, he's got guard dogs that are terrifying and shit like this. Goes there, all the dogs were fucking dead when I got there, my God, and we were on our own. It was nighttime as well, and my gun was actually made out of paper. And, you know, it's just every step of the way, it's just like there's everything, and it's remote and helpless, and there might be phones, but the phone lines can be cut, and it's that classic kind of, and then they start describing the cosmic horror of things, and you as a reader in the 1920s trying to wrap your head around that would be very difficult, right? So I think the points of context, the reason that nobody liked his work in the 1930s was because we have a better grasp on that science now, so when we read it, we find it a bit dated, but we get where he's coming from. I think that's why he's more popular now than he was then. It can be translated better, you know.
I think a key thing about it is because of the era which he was writing in and setting the stories in, is that the protagonists are always vulnerable. They don't have technology or communication. They're on their own, and I think that isolation and vulnerability is key.
There's absolutely a lot of that, and I think that, you know, we were talking before we started recording this about how his father was institutionalized, and
during this actually.
Was it excellent? I didn't know if we pressed record or not. I just waffle. But his properly, thank you. I think a lot of what he's talking about isn't necessarily about the horror or the science fiction or the you know, like the strange and crazy things. It doesn't matter that, you know, like there might be cats on Saturn. What matters is the way that people handle things. It's the way that people deal with things, and that slow descent into madness that comes from things you can't understand. And I think that if you look at Lovecraft from a humanist point of view instead of a science fiction point of view, the stories become actually even more interesting because they are genuinely about people who do not have many resources at their disposal, doing everything they can to maintain their mundanity.
Yeah,
and it's a
the
really interesting.
Of madness comes from, you know, not being able to cling to that mundanity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Things are changing and you can't cope with it.
You may have noticed that in the role-playing games that I run.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what makes it kind of really clear, you know? Like,
it's that whole thing, sanity has become very much connected with Lovecraft, especially in the games and stuff, but that descent into madness as your reality crumbles around you and you are revealed, has to be something very small in a far, far larger scheme than you ever conceived of.
Yep.
Even the game itself, the role-playing game, the more you learn of that world, the more through mythos you gain, the less maximum sanity you can ever possess, right? Yeah. So everyone who's played it gets it. Which is
and
great.
nobody wants to lose their sanity. And when people lose hit points, and you go, okay, cool, like we'll just bung their character in a hospital for 3 months. At least they'll have round-the-clock care. They'll probably be okay. But you lose someone's sanity, there isn't the provision for getting that back easily. There isn't the provision for going into therapy or anything like that. You would have to be institutionalized, which, if you're playing in the 1920s or before, is probably a worse situation than remaining out in the world in some cases. And again, it just kind of reinforces that these are things that you can't, hello, normal person, hello, normal business owner, you have stumbled across this photograph that moves when you look at it, and a great big eye has come into the picture, and now you're doubting everything around you, and a whole big group of people have just turned up with guns and shot at something that you can't see.
Odd example.
Off you go, make sense of that. And that's where the idea of losing sanity being really scary comes in, because it's so much harder to get it back than it is to physically heal.
I reckon it was mostly because his grandfather was called Whipple.
That was his actual name?
Yeah.
Whipple Lovecraft?
No, his grandfather was Whipple Phillips.
Whipple
No, that's much more sensible.
Whipple
Phillips.
Whipple Van Buren Phillips was his grandfather.
Whipple Van Buren Phillips.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's what I'm going to call my next cat.
Nice. Roby
stand outside and call that in the street.
Whipple Phillips.
And yeah, Roby was the other half of that relationship, so it was Whipple and Roby.
Whipple and Roby.
Yeah.
Van Buren.
They sound like
Phillips.
a cop buddy act.
No, I've met
Whipple and Brody. Sorry, that's the professionals, isn't it?
No, I've met those people, and they're the kind of Whipple and Roby are the sort of people that talk without moving their mouths.
They're cool.
Very, very rich.
Cool Whipple. Anyway, yes. So I don't know how we got that far into the. We're still talking about how it's affected film and stuff. We've only got 15 minutes left. But I think to round that off, I think we've covered that nicely. The concept of most of the films and books that have been inspired by Lovecraftian work have featured that heavy element of helplessness and I guess isolation of character, rather than just the individual themselves. Their character often becomes isolated as well, as in who they are and what they believe in and what they stand for often becomes quite isolated and attacked and put under question, and that's very Lovecraft. And that medium, is something that we probably could carry on discussing all day, and we don't really have enough time to do that. So we won't. We've probably got enough time to chat a little bit about probably one of the biggest mediums for talking about Cthulhu, which is the role-playing game that was developed in the early 80s by Chaosium, and a little bit of Games Workshop was thrown in there as well. And I think it all came out of sort of a RuneQuest idea, and then they were like, let's just turn this into a game. And Second Ed came out, and it was glorious, and it was their 40th anniversary, I think last year or the year before. I just want to touch on now, this is all based out of that one work, and it is the second longest running and oldest reproduced, reprinted role-playing games in existence, obviously straight after Dungeons and Dragons. But that's a long time for it to be going, and have sustained such great popularity for such a long time. And one of the biggest things that it does is it creates a fandom for people to continue to create work in his universe on a daily basis. People are still writing games, publishing work, and telling stories. I guarantee you, some of them are right now. Somebody's running a Call of Cthulhu tabletop role-playing game and telling their own little stories set in the mythos, or at least in and around the concept of that cosmic horror we were just discussing, and the helplessness and everything else it feels. Because most of my games stand alone from the mythos a lot of the time, because I prefer it that way. But I just love the concept of the horror style of the writing. So there you go. I said that in one good piece there. That was quite good.
That was nice. I liked that.
Up until I started doing this bit. And we've all role played Cthulhu. We've all played in the world of the role playing game. I started doing it as I think basically my first choice of role playing game after D&D, and forced other people to play it because no one else would, because it was the 80s and D&D was big. And nowadays it's just D&D apparently, as far as I can tell. Most people want to play. But yeah, I mean, like we've all told stories in that medium, right?
Yeah, yep. I've done at least one LARP in it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've had, like, I think for me, in the role playing game term, it's always been, I've always been like a passenger on that ride. I've always been a player. I've never been a keeper. I've never kind of actually developed my own like tabletop game. But we did, Stephen and I, along with a whole heap of other lovely people, develop a LARP game that we played, and that was possibly one of the most I knew what was going on, and it was still one of the most terrifying experiences of my life.
I was going to touch that straight away, to be honest, before we got into any stories. I mean, I can definitely say that I've scared myself. Well, I've put across that like kind of interaction in the game. I felt that kind of reverberation of in the story and how helpless the players feel. And often when shit is going bad for them, and I want to help them as the keeper, I'm like, there's not much I can really do here. I feel as helpless as they do. I don't know about you two. If that's been your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody's helpless.
Mark, say something.
Well, if we're talking about LARP here,
or role playing,
well, I mean, I've done more LARPing than I have tabletop with Cthulhu, I think. But I've been a player on some very good Lovecraftian games, and I've run one myself with obviously with a team of people, which was absolutely rooted in Lovecraftian horror, and I think it's possibly one of my favorite genres to do a LARP in. Tabletopping. Tabletopping I've only really played as a player a few times.
What about your what eras are your favourites to run it in?
I like the classic. I like the 1920s because again, you're removing technology from people. So not everybody's going around with AK-47s or chain
not
guns
everyone.
or
Some people
whatever.
Are.
No, but I mean, you make people vulnerable, and I think you also that works best when you've got small groups of players because again, you don't have that safety of numbers. You make those players vulnerable. And I think that's, as I was saying before, I think that vulnerability is a big part of Lovecraftian horror, that there is no hiding from it, there is no escape for it. And when you've got a player group of say 8 people, and that there's no hiding behind anybody else, you are all equally vulnerable.
I'm actually going to point to I was running a game on Saturday, and I wasn't expecting it to be as terrifying as it was. It was really sparked by one player, but they got into a bit of a serious situation with something horrible. I'm not going to go into great details, but there was a bit of bravado from some of the players. They were like, "Oh, we can handle this shit," kind of thing. But several of them were literally doing the whole they were out of character, absolutely shitting their pants. Like, there's nothing we can do. There was. We're stop antagonizing the situation. We're going to fucking die. And you could feel this palpable level of absolute terror coming off of people and it wasn't anything to do with like my descriptive work, which often is very helpful to kind of like set the scene and get the terror rolling. They kind of like ended up in this scenario, which was quite terrifying, mostly by their own design. And then, watching a couple of them just crumble, because they couldn't think of anything to do. They didn't have any power to, and that was it. They had no leverage in a situation, and that entirely came, as you say, because they were helpless, and it was very good. I really enjoyed it. It was it made a strong part of my game for the rest of the afternoon, which was very nice. The story kind of revolved around that from then on. Holly missed it, of course, because she couldn't bother to turn up.
I was really sick. I was really sick. I'm still quite sick. Actually, though, I'm not. I'm much better than I was, but I can talk, for example. But No,
which is good, really, seeing as we're doing a podcast.
Yeah, it's nice, isn't it?
It's a bit weird otherwise.
True. I think for me, like, I love the 1920s, but I just love the 1920s anyway.
Mhm.
Like, I absolutely was. I mean, I think, I was absolutely born in the wrong time period. I should either have been, a young adult at the beginning of the 1920s, or I should have been some kind of waif and stray on a moorland somewhere in the 1800s.
Big fan of polio, are we?
I'm a massive fan of Wuthering Heights. It's the romantic in me. What can I say? But I think one of the settings that I've really enjoyed for Cthulhu is the 1970s, because you've got that same level of technology, right? Like, you've got phones, and that's it. Like, you've got a landline
we
phone,
used
and that's
landline
it.
phones as a weapon against the players.
We did use landline phones. It was amazing. We had one phone, and it was bright red, and the players started referring to it as the anxiety phone after about 40 minutes of it being in operation. And it was a rotary phone, like a red kind of like rotary phone, and you could put a SIM card in it. And we put a SIM card in it and forwarded the number, set up a forward on it so that it would forward to a mobile that was a few rooms away. And the players had contacts. They had like 3 people each that they could call for potential information. And they've just been using it all day to call out because they were stuck in the middle of nowhere, and they were trying to get information on things and trying to get people to come and pick them up, but they were always dialing out. So we waited until it got dark, and then we started dialing in and calling, and calling them, and they could not cope with it at all. It was beautiful because you could have this, you kind of almost had that moment, in a room where like people are talking and suddenly there's a lull in the conversation, just for a minute, and then, well, just for even for a second, and then it starts building itself back up again, and people always notice those things. And we were in the other room with the phone poised on dial, and as soon as that lull happened, we pressed the button and the anxiety shot up through the roof, and it was brilliant.
It wasn't the only stuff going on, of course. It wasn't just
No.
vocal. There was actual plot going on as well.
No, there was so much going on, but like, it was one of those things where we made something that could have been a lifeline for them actually into another vulnerability.
The saddest part for me about the fact that we didn't actually do the follow-up to the 1970s one, because I wanted to do an immediate follow-up set in the early 1980s, which was a Blake 7 convention, but I wasn't allowed.
Oddly enough, one of the LARPs that I went on, Lovecraftian one, was set in the 1970s too. It does seem to be a good little era to set it in. Plus, you get to wear outrageous clothes.
Yep, we went to a kilo sale.
We did. We went to a kilo sale and bought basically everything that they had from the 1970s. It was fantastic.
And that poor priest that put his coat down.
Yeah, that was a really beautiful coat.
I'm assuming there's a beautiful priest's coat, like handmade in Italy, that I picked up for 15 quid, and it's gorgeous. I can only presume that a priest went there, took his coat off to try something else on. I accidentally picked it up and bought it.
No, it did not seem like it should have been there, but it was gorgeous.
No. Yeah, so like I am actually going to have to like kind of start winding this down. We are nowhere near finishing. So, gentle listener, if you're enjoying this, we're probably going to come back and finish it off at a later time, because waxing lyrical about the RPG and a bit of LARP has eaten into a lot of our time. I definitely want to say that, like, in the tabletop role-playing game, I love the fact as well that we talked about how good Shadows of Innsmouth was, and also Mountains of Madness, right? I've got the original and some of the newer ones of their conversions of those into places that you can go as investigators, and it's gorgeous. There's people that are turning these stories into stuff that you can play on the tabletop. Really love their work, and you can feel them picking up Lovecraft's work and moving on with it, and building it and keeping this fandom going. As I was saying earlier, it's phenomenal. I'm absolutely astounded by how much work there is out there in the tabletop role-playing world. It's excellent stuff. I think that the Cthulhu stuff is probably the best produced material that has been made by a games company. The handouts, the quality of the feel of them. When you look at the passports, like in Horror on the Orient Express and stuff, everything is so valid to the 1920s. You know, it's very good. And it brings you back then. That I agree. The period of the 1920s when it was all written around. Yeah, it really brings that out. And I think it's beautiful saying. The tabletop role playing game, and the LARP, of course, because you know we should steal some cars from Beauty Museum and then run some 1920s LARP, mostly being pursued by today's modern police force as the eldritch horror that we can't actually defeat.
I mean, you can now like rent out abandoned London Underground stations.
I told you this.
I know, and I'm bringing it up because.
But I was going to talk to Mark about maybe running like some Fallout down there. We're doing like the new Fallout London, isn't it? So.
Yeah, we will be definitely touching on that at some point.
Yes, we can hire that out. We can do some Neverwhere LARP. Definitely do some Neverwhere LARP and some Fallout. Anyway,
Neverwhere would be good.
I feel like we're steering away from the subject matter. Right, okay, so next time we talk about this, we'll finish off talking about a bit more about the game, because there's a little bit more to drag out of that. And we wanted to talk about computer games and board games and card games, which I think we can definitely go down the road of to do a follow-up on the Cthulhu thing. And also the fact that there is a Cthulhu in every home nowadays, you know, more or less, about how it rears its head in popular culture so much. But yeah, that's despite the fact that, you know, HP Lovecraft was an awful human being who wrote very racist poetry, including stuff like New England Falling and on the creation of. We won't go into that.
Absolutely not.
But his work, thank God he's dead. You know, lives on and is a beautiful stimulus for a lot more better-minded people to make good of his universe. So yes, that's us. That is us, beautiful people. Next week, we'll be chatting about different elements of these things. Hopefully, the Cthulhu stuff. We by then, like Holly and I would have been to the Games Expo. I'm no idea when the Games Expo pod's going to come out. Whether this will have actually happened and this will have been produced and listened to by people, and we're about to do the live pod that we're discussing, or the pre-recorded pod.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Minefield of publication dates.
Yeah, but we'll keep going. We'll hopefully do some stuff about the Games Expo, and we'll keep moving through the gears towards the post-apoc genre that we want to talk about. We've touched on Fallout there sneakily ahead of our live gig at Fancy Forest. And we have a Discord channel which by now should be up and running, and probably a Patreon and bits and pieces that you can come and join. So if you're listening to this and you enjoyed it, come and click on the link in our podcast description to the various things that we're doing. It's starting up, the community is growing, and we're building it. We're going to be throwing out some live pods and other bits and pieces that you can come and listen to, and you can ask us questions and blah, blah, blah. If you could leave us a review too, that'd be grand. So it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
The power of the thrice goodbye. Have an amazing week, people. Much love.
Bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to A Geek Tragedy with me, Plague Mantle, and my best friend, the excellent Holly Properly, and our actually famous guy, Mark Cordory. If you like this, there is plenty more at patreon.com/A Geek Tragedy. Production is by Kit Brutnell. Our logo and artwork is by markcordory.com. Music is by Borislaw Kozielski. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Geek Tragedy. Email us at geektragedypodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe, leave us a rating and a review. And don't forget to tell all your geeky friends. Also, a big shout out to all of our genius geeks. We adore each and every one of you. And of course, much love. Take care of each other.